Hey guys, Dusty here. Today I'm going to give you my top 7 aid station tips. Aid stations are important when it comes to triathlon. Now, in some of the shorter events like a sprint and Olympic, you might not need an aid station, especially if you can pack all of your nutrition on the bike, but mistakes do happen. I've lost water bottles off my bike coming out of transition and either didn't know or didn't go back and pick them up. So when mistakes like that happen, you are going to need to use the aid stations. And then of course, as you get into longer distances like half Ironman and Ironman distance, then aid stations become much more important. They can make or break your day, because more than likely you're going to be relying on an aid station at some point throughout the day. So let's get started with tip number 1, and that would be aid stations that happen out on the bike course. And my first tip would be to slow down. I see and I've heard so many stories about triathletes, and it's happened to me, that aren't willing to slow down for the 5 seconds that it's going to take you to actually ride your bike through the aid station. And what ends up happening is you're just going through way too fast through the aid station. They can't catch the bottle. They just keep knocking it out of the volunteers' hands. And you'll probably only get 2, maybe 3 chances at most going through a bike aid station to actually get your aid. And it's happened to me where I've been going too fast or my hands were too cold to grab the bottle, and I've knocked water bottles out of the volunteers' hands 3 times but not actually held on to it for myself. So slow down, and when you're approaching the volunteer, make sure you slow down and try to absorb some of the impact, by just like you're catching a football or something, just try to absorb it a little bit more. And that brings me into my second aid station tip, which is, if you're not going to get anything at a bike aid station, stay in the middle of the road. Don't cross over the center line, but stay in the middle, out of the volunteers' way and out of anyone's way who wants to get aid. I've seen this happen many times in triathlons, and I've heard about it even more times, is someone's just ripping through an aid station on the bike and they're staying too close to the volunteers and the other athletes getting aid. And what will happen is someone will get the aid from the volunteer and they'll kind of wobble getting back on their bike or getting back up to speed. What ends up happening is they end up crashing into someone who's just going straight through the aid station and not getting aid. So aid stations on the bike can be dangerous, especially if there's a lot of athletes there at once. So if you're not going to have aid, make sure you stay in the middle of the road and stay out of any of the athletes and volunteers' way. Trust me, you don't want your race to end because you crashed in an aid station. That actually happened to me once. Okay, now we'll get on to the rest of the tips, and these all have to do with run course aid stations. So these not only apply to triathletes, but they can also apply to runners as well. So one thing to remember when it comes to aid stations is that they're ran by volunteers, and yes, sometimes the volunteers can mess up, but we still need to respect all volunteers. We wouldn't be able to run big Ironman events or a lot of events in general if it wasn't for volunteers. So be respectful. I know we can go to a lot of dark places out there on the run course, especially later in the run, and it might be easy to act out and get mad at a volunteer for dropping your water or giving you Coke when you ask for Gatorade. Just remember, they're volunteering their time to help you, and mistakes happen. Okay, so aid station tip number 3 would be to make sure when you're approaching an aid station on the run course that you're getting the volunteers' attention. It happens to me all the time, but if I'm running through an aid station and I'm coming through quite fast and I haven't gotten the attention of someone who I want to grab the aid from, sometimes they don't even know I'm there and it's too late. Either I knocked it out of their hand or they weren't ready and they drop it. So I recommend, as you're running up to an aid station, look for someone who's a confident volunteer, standing there yelling out what they have. Point at them, confirm with them that that's what you want. If it's water, you point at them, say water, water. Or if it's Coke that you need, say Coke. Confirm that, create a connection, and then you know that they'll be waiting for you when you run past them, that they can give you the aid. And tip number 4 is make sure you know what's in the cup before you dump it on your head or you drink it. I'd say this happens to me at least once a year, but I'll be running through an aid station and when it's hot out, I'm dumping multiple cups of water over my head. And often when that happens, you're just grabbing as many cups as you can, trusting that the volunteers giving you those cups contain water. Well, I've poured Gatorade on my head, I've poured Coke on my head, and those are probably the two main things, but it's never nice pouring Coke into your head and into your eyes. So if you're looking for water to pour on your head and you have a little glance down and see, oh, there's a black liquid, maybe don't pour it on your head. So that's a pretty minor little tip, but no one wants to pour Coke on their head in the middle of a race, so just make sure you check. All right, tip number 5 is when you're going to drink the aid on the run course, usually they're in plastic or paper cups, and what that means is you can actually squeeze the top and make a funnel so you can get it in your mouth a lot easier. This is just a super simple tip, but it's going to save you from trying to put water, Coke, or Gatorade or whatever in your mouth, and instead of just getting some in your mouth while you're running and the rest all over you, when you funnel it, it makes it much easier to get that liquid inside of you. All right, tip number 6 is it's okay to walk through an aid station. I think there's a lot of triathletes out there, especially Ironman triathletes, that are not willing to walk on the run course, when I think if they walked half or even more of the aid stations, they would probably end up having a faster race. As long as when you get to the end of that aid station and you turn that mental switch on to I need to run the next mile until I get to the next aid station, more than likely you'll be okay. So many triathletes just run right through an aid station. They don't get the aid that they need, or they don't take as much in as they need, or if it's really hot, they don't get that extra sponge or ice or whatever. So especially if it's hot out, take your time going through an aid station, get all the things to cool you down, get all the things to fuel you up until you can make it to the next aid station. Just know that it is okay to walk through an aid station. If you watch some of the previous years of Kona coverage, you'll see some of the pro winners of Kona actually walking through the aid station. So if Crowe or Jan Frodeno or whoever can walk through an aid station, it's okay to walk through an aid station. My last tip that is, if you don't get the aid that you want, or say you drop a gel or something and you're not going to be able to get to the next aid station for 10 minutes or 30 minutes, you have to calculate in, is it worth me turning around and going back and picking up what it is that I dropped? Say it's an Ironman event and the next aid station isn't until 30K past the aid station you just went through. If you have no nutrition left and you are relying on this bottle to help fulfill some of your energy needs until you reach the next aid station, it's probably worth it to slow down, pull over, make sure it's safe, and going back and picking up that bottle. That's another thing that happens to athletes all the time, is they'll go through an aid station and they really needed that aid and they didn't end up getting it, and it's like, well, you could have pulled over and stopped and went back and picked it up. That's not against the rules. So those are some tips. Some of those might help you, some of those might not help you, but I thought I would just share 7 of some of my top aid station tips with you. So if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe for more everything running, triathlon, and nutrition related.